So in this video, I'm basically going to be telling you my actual story. So this is a true story. I have nothing to sell you. I have no courses. I have no bull. This is literally just my story of how I sold my company. I'll tell you exactly how much I sold it for, which I told you in the title. I sold it for $1.7 million, and I'm going to talk about why I walked with nothing. And it's not because the company who bought it from me didn't pay. They paid. They were wonderful to deal with, but it was because of how the deal was structured and what actually happens when you sell a business that a lot of people don't realize. And so I'm going to talk about the nuances in terms of taxes, debt, and everything that goes into it. And so the short answer is to why I walked with nothing after selling my company for 1.7 million was strategically when I was selling this business, I had a number in my mind, and I'll talk about why I wanted to sell my company in a little bit. But the reason 1.7 million was the number that I absolutely had to walk with when this deal was going down was because I had over $1 million in debt. And when you sell a company, the IRS doesn't care how much debt that you have. And some of these were normal debts, so like an SBA loan. There's some vehicle debts, but there's also some vendor debt. And so all in all, it added up to close to 1.4 in terms of the actual amount of money that I was going to have to cough up just in order to close the business. Now, I'll talk a little bit about why I was in that position, because some of it was ordinary course of running a business, and the other part of those debts was debts that were incurred due to expansion, because I was trying to actually grow the company to much larger than what it was when I sold. We were a $3 million company. That was the first inflection point we hit where we started to stall out. And when I say stall out, I mean a lot of, when you're growing a business and you hit various inflection points at certain revenue targets, what happens is like you have to structure the business in order for it to grow to that next level. And when we hit 3 million, that was when we hit that first inflection point. And I came to find out later that that was an inflection point, meaning that's a break point where a lot of things fall apart. And that's exactly what happened the first year we hit it. And we stalled out around that number. And long story short is when I started growing my company past those, trying to scale past that number and was struggling. And so in 2022, I struggled to break past 3 million. We did 3.5, and we were staffed up to do a lot higher revenue than that. And my position or my company wasn't in a position in terms of how it was structured, in terms of all the things that have to be in place to get to those next inflection points. And I actually learned that by going through some of the 10X coursework offered through Grant Cardone, 10X Ventures, which is Brandon Dawson, Natalie Dawson. Very helpful coursework, very helpful information. I found it tremendously valuable in terms of how to operationalize a business. It's stuff that I hadn't learned before. And so when I had hit those inflection points and I was struggling to grow, and I was basically starting to look for answers, look for help on how to get, strategically, and what I actually needed to do to my systems, what I needed to do to operations, what I needed to do to marketing and sales to actually get to that next inflection point. And that's when I kind of stumbled upon the 10X program. And long story short is I had a daughter. My first daughter was born about 10 months after that period where I started operationalizing the business to continue expanding. And I basically, when that happened, I'm sure anyone watching who's a father knows it's a life-changing experience. But long story short was I had a very real moment with myself where I knew that this is not what I wanted to do anymore, which was running an HVAC company. It was not my calling, and nothing against it. I don't have anything against the industry. I actually have a lot of respect for tradespeople. I have a lot of respect for contractors. A part of me, went into the trades because I wanted to become an adult and grow up. And I felt like I kind of became a man in the trades, in the sense of I ran a real business. I scaled it from scratch, from $0 all the way up to over 3 million in revenue. And we were profitable most years along the way. And I learned a lot about, the trades. I got licensed in multiple states. And when, my daughter was born, that was when I kind of, within a couple days, I made a decision. I was ready to sell, and this was not what I wanted to do with my life. And so that's why I made a decision to sell. And the problem was at the time, I didn't have good financials for the prior years. Now, I had very good financials in the sense of I had clean numbers. Like I was on accrual accounting, which is important when you're selling this type of business, at least at the larger numbers, because when your revenue starts breaking past $1 million, you really want to be on an accrual basis, not a cash basis. And so I was set up to sell, but in that respect, and that I had clean optics. But no, I don't want to say no one wants to buy a business that's breaking even or had years where they broke even in 2 out of the past 3 years, and that was my story. And part of it was, I got squeezed by price hikes. Everyone, in 2020 and 2021 were very profitable years, but then those price hikes caught up with us because it was on every front, from insurance to, just every cost of running a business got extremely out of hand, and started getting pushback from customers on price, because you can only pass that cost on to customers to some extent. And also when we were trying to scale at the same time, and I wasn't as operationalized as I thought, meaning I didn't have a good system for marketing, or as good of a system for marketing as I thought. I didn't have as good of a system for sales and handling leads as I thought, and handling follow-up and making sure that we were being efficient as a company. And so those are all the things that kind of, started to crush me. But I made that decision, like I said, to sell the company basically a couple days after my daughter was born. I just had so much clarity that I did not want to do that anymore. And so then became the problem, or then the next thought that I had was, okay, how do I set my business up to sell it or get it ready to sell? Because I was thinking going to be at least a 2-year, maybe 3-year process to really get a couple years of solid financials, so I could put the business in a good position to where I could show a very healthy profit, that we had trimmed all the fat. We had a lot of extra vehicles at the time that we had sold because we had had staffing issues. We had tried to grow into other markets where we were expanding to Phoenix a little bit prematurely, and I knew that when I expanded there that it was premature to expand to Phoenix. But what I wanted to do, or part of my motivation in going to Phoenix and expanding into a new market, was I wanted to operationalize the business at the same time I was building a new market, so I could put systems in both places at the same time. And I just wanted to, I hate feeling like I'm not progressing, I just started to feel I felt very stagnant. And so for me, that was a way to reinvigorate kind of that passion into the business. And so the number one reason that, like anyone, when you talk about, selling your business, if you're thinking about selling your business, or you're in a position where you're just in the building phase and you're wondering, well, how do you know when it's time to sell, or when you get to that point? For me, my point, I only have, point of reference from one point. One, but I know there's a couple, several reasons to sell, but really it comes down to 2 reasons. One is life change, meaning you don't want the business anymore, and so you're going to be doing something different. And a lot of times this happens with people in retirement and things like that, and the business just doesn't serve the same purpose that it once did, in the sense of it no longer brings you passion, or, maybe it hasn't done that for years. Maybe you've been burnt out for a while, but it's not bringing you passion. You have other things that you want to pursue, and so it's time to move on. The other, which is the goal, it was my goal when I started the business, is to get the business to a point where it's optimized for sale, meaning that you're at a point where, for example, in the HVAC space, private equity groups are buying out home services companies left and right. There was even it was funny because a lot of people had sent me the same article, or a couple of people in my family had sent me the same article when they knew I was in the process of selling my company. That was posted in the Wall Street Journal about how private equity groups were buying up HVAC companies left and right, and why they were buying them up. And, the bottom line is, when you talk about a private equity group or companies that are doing roll-ups where they're taking multiple HVAC companies and combining them into one, when they're buying these businesses, when you start getting to a company that's doing over 10 million or 20 million or 50 million in revenue, you're talking about a very, very small pond of companies that are actually throwing up those types of numbers. Like in every single market in major cities, there's a handful of companies that are doing over 10 million in revenue. There's not a lot of companies breaking that number. The actual statistic on companies that in any business, not just HVAC, that actually break 10 million in revenue, I've heard the most optimistic number was 4 out of 250. That was at an Alex Hormozy event, acquisition.com. And the other statistic that I've heard is 6 out of 10,000, which is literally, 1 in 16,000 businesses, or 1 in 18, somewhere around there, businesses that actually break 10 million. So the amount of businesses that are breaking 10 million in revenue is very small. And my point with that is that when you get to, if you want to build to those higher numbers in order to sell, that's the ultimate goal, if that's what you're trying to do with your business, because you're going to get a much higher multiple. And so some of you might have been thinking, and this was a question. I had met a business broker casually, and he said, how did you sell your company when you had 2 years of bad financials? Where, because normally how did they arrive at that valuation? And the valuation was very simple for me, because I was like, listen, this is what I need to walk. So I know it's not worth that on paper, right? And it just matters whether or not it's worth it to you to have that sort of market penetration into this market. And if it is, great, you can have it, because this was a strategic acquisition as part of another buy for them. I had licensing in a metro that was difficult to get licensed in, which was in the city of Denver. And Denver city licensing is just, it's a little bit of a process, and it's very convoluted. And so because I had that, the company was an asset to them, and they were, and we also had market penetration in zip codes that were good demographics in terms of where they wanted to be, in terms of the homeowners they were looking to serve, because there were wealthier neighborhoods. And honestly, that's one of the best, if you can get market penetration into those neighborhoods, you have a customer base that is very insulated, and they're just a very valuable customer. And so that was kind of what my ticket to freedom was. And so the original offer price was, substantially lower than that, but it was just something that it just took, several months of kind of back and forth negotiation on, this is where I have to be, because all these debts have to get paid on the exit of the business. And I also need to be able to satisfy my tax liability, because even though, the IRS doesn't care what you sell your business for, if you have a bunch of debt along the way, they look at it as a total amount of cash that's received. And so they were treating that as, I owe them long-term capital gains tax based on that money that I received, even though all of it was, going out the door basically at closing. And so that's the actual story of how I sold my business for $1.7 million and why I walked with nothing. And part of one of the things that I'm doing now and ventures that I'm doing is, I'm very straightforward in terms of the reason I created this video, and I'm just being so blunt, is there's plenty of videos on the internet of, hey, I sold my business for $50 million, or I sold my business for XYZ, and buy my course and come to my seminar and do this. And I didn't want to be another one of those guys that just said, hey, I sold my business and, I sold my HVAC company and pretended to be some guru. That I do know a thing or two about, growing an HVAC company. I got to a certain point, but it was 3 million in revenue, which is where 98% of businesses don't break. So I barely broke that, but I stalled out at that revenue number. And so it's one of those things where I'm not trying to pretend to be someone I'm not. And so I want to be very transparent, because if you're in a position where you're watching this and you have an HVAC company, or you have a similar service-based business or plumbing, and you're struggling, or you're at that inflection point where you're between 1 and 3 million, it's very common. It happens to a lot of people. And if you happen to be looking to sell your business, recently I've started working with business brokers specifically in the space. So if you're wanting to see what your business is worth, or how you would sell the business, or how you can operationalize it so that you could get the maximum value for it, or so that you can stitch it up in a way and that it's easy to sell, and it's packaged nicely and someone would be willing to buy it. That's exactly what we talk about on this channel, and that's exactly what we do. So if you're interested, if you're personally trying to sell your business right now, there is a link in the description where you can submit your information and be connected with a business broker that specializes in the home services space. So whether that's HVAC or plumbing, or any of the other home services that are very in demand right now, it's a very good time to sell any sort of service-based business. There's a lot of buyers for them and not as many sellers. So if you're a seller, you are in high demand. And if you want to know, what goes into making a business more valuable in terms of like how it's actually valued and what the multiples are that they will pay out, that's exactly what we talk about on this channel as well. So make sure you hit the like button if you found this content helpful, and consider subscribing if you want more content like this, or content on how you can scale your business, or how I scaled my business to the point before I sold it, and things that I learned along the way. So again, I hope you found this content helpful. And if you did, hit that like button for the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. And we will catch you on the next episode.